What's happening, Cardinal Nation? Welcome back to the CardinOLL podcast, a classroom podcast that has been designed to interview expert industry leaders and gain their insight so that this podcast can help take your leadership and your learning to the next level immediately. Let me start off with a great quote today. I want my teams to be more detached from their wins and losses and more focused on doing the little things well. When you focus on getting the win, it can suffocate you, especially during the playoffs when the pressure gets thick. That quote was made by none other than Hall of Fame softball coach Sue Enquist, who won 11 national championships at the University of California, Los Angeles, also known as UCLA. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't want to miss this month of our guests. We will be interviewing some of the top leaders at the university and the community, and they are doing all the little things well. These amazing guests are doing phenomenal work by not letting the pressure get to them or to their teams. So be sure to tune in for the CardinOLL podcast Men's Health Edition month this month on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and just right, you can view us every Friday on YouTube at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. I am Dr. C. Sean Owens, also known by my social media moniker right there at the Professor Owens. Let me go on and bring in my great co-host. He is the one, the only, the incomparable, Dr. Andrew McCart. Dr. McCart, how's it going today?
Dr. Owens, it's great to be here. Thank you. And we do interview a lot of leaders. We interview some experts in their field, and today is, I think, whomever lines up these guests, whether it's you or Susan, we've just got an amazing guest today, and I'm excited. I've got a fresh ink pen. I've got a fresh pad of paper here. I'm ready to learn, and class is going to be in session, I have a feeling, shortly.
I got a pen. I got my notepad right here below me. I even have a backup. Oh, I just tapped my camera. I even have a backup right here just in case this one goes out of ink. We joke about that quite often here on the CardinOLL podcast, that sometimes our leaders and our guests give us such great notes that we run out of ink. So, ladies and gentlemen, before we jump into today's classroom podcast with a special guest, I want to let our listeners and viewers know that if you are ready to learn to lead with compassion and expertise, you can save time and money by enrolling in UofL's Bachelor's in Organizational Leadership and Learning. The degree's unique prior learning assessment course, our PLA course, awards you tuition-free college credit for your work experience. Knowing that, you can save up to $23,000. Learn more about this value from amazing benefits of the BSOLL program. You can check us out at, oops, I got the wrong one up here, but that's okay. We will switch it out. It is UofL.me/BSOLL-podcast. Again, if you want to learn more about this bachelor's degree where you can save up to $23,000 from our PLA course, check us out at UofL.me/BSOLL-podcast. So now that we got that out of the way, let me go on and introduce our guest. Ladies and gentlemen, he is from the great state of Kentucky. That's right. He's paid his dues because he started off at the lowest level possible as a middle school basketball coach. He moved up to high school, and now he's running his own college program. He's the sole reason we keep gas in the planes in March around here in Louisville. Why? Because his lightning style coaching speed always delivers his basketball teams into March Madness. He's a winner as he has a head coaching record of 386-107, and Louisville has been his only collegiate head coaching job. That's right. He's winning right here for Cardinal Nation. He keeps the banners raised in the athletic department because over the last 4 seasons, he's won the regular season ACC women's basketball tournament. He's a husband. He's a father. He's our guest. And he's an all-around great guy. So, ladies and gentlemen, go get your pens, get your pencils, get your notepads, get your memo boards, your iPads, your iPhones, whatever it is that you take notes on today as we go into the classroom with today's guest. He's the one, he's the only, he's the venerable, he's head coach Jeff Walz. Coach Walz, how you doing today?
I'm doing great. I appreciate that introduction. I've got a lot to live up to right here.
Coach Walz, the reality is that's what you've already done. So you've already lived into it. Here on the Cardinal Call podcast, we don't really want to waste a lot of time because we know your time is precious. We jump right in, both feet into the deep end of the pool. So let's get started. Marketing expert Seth Godin said this. He said that leadership is the art of giving people a platform for spreading ideas that work. So, Coach Walz, whoops, there you go. How do you define leadership?
You know what? It's a great cool question. I think for myself in the profession that I have and what I do, it's your ability to get others to accomplish more than what they ever dreamed they could.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because in our profession, in my profession, you don't always get what they per se might be the best player when you recruit them. So what you've got to be able to do is get a lot of these young athletes to be able to accomplish more than what they thought was possible. Mm-hmm. And in doing that, it's building confidence, building self-confidence and self-worth. And that's really how I would define what leadership is to me.
I say it every week, and this week is no different. Coach Walz, you bring a new, unique aspect to the definition. I think what you said was have to get others to do more than they think they can. You want them to accomplish more than they dreamed they could. That is a very unique definition that of all of our guests. Again, that is a unique one that no one has said so far. So I think you can coin that and trademark it and take it to the bank. Dr. McCart, what do you got?
Well, Coach Walz, I'm glad you said that because I think back on my 18 to 22 years old, that was a real transformative time in life. And I'm curious, for a lot of our audience can be adult learners and they're students that we have in our program. And the average age in our organizational leadership program is 38. And I'm curious if you could tell us some of the things, some of the components you have to help people live up to more than they dreamed they could during, I mean, maybe they're more able to change at 18 to 22 than they are 38, but maybe there are some elements there. How do you do that in terms of leadership? It's just a follow up to your last answer there. But what do you do to guide people that way and help lead them to grow?
Well, I think the big key for us is you've got to, and no matter what type of work you're in, whoever you're trying to lead, you've got to build trust. You've got to make sure whoever is working with you, for you, they have to know that they can trust you and what you say is what you mean. And that's what we talk to our players about all the time is you might not like what I have to say all the time, but it's going to be the truth. And a lot of us have to deal with accepting the truth. And then if you don't like what you're hearing, figure out a way to change it. So we are very direct here within our program. But we also show compassion. You know, there are ways to get directness across that doesn't always have to be where you might be tearing someone down.
I think that's a great point, Coach. We're big fans of leadership quotes here, and I heard one from Dave Ramsey, and he said, "To be unclear is to be unkind." And that idea is if you're not direct, if you don't really tell people how they can get better, then you're really kind of robbing them of an opportunity to grow. I think that's a great point there. So, Yeah, well, let me move on to our next formal question here. And so, Coach, I'm looking over here at your resume on the other screen, and it's there's so many things here. I've got to scroll up and down just to get the highlights. And just really the winningest coach in program history in 14 seasons at the University of just at the very top of your class, top of really any class with this resume. And our next question really is, who do you look up to and who do you think exemplifies your definition of leadership, whether it's a real person or fictitious? Because you get to what looks like to us the top of the ladder. I mean, where do you look for guidance, motivation, inspiration, that kind of thing?
Well, I think for me, it's real simple. My father is one that I admire and look up to. He coached football. He played college football. He coached us. I've got two older brothers, a younger sister. He coached us through all the little leagues and the different sports that we played growing up. but just watching him, how he did things, how he still approaches his life, the respect that he's gained throughout our community from the people that he's interacted with. It's one of the easy ones for me is when you've got that type of example at home that you see every day, it's not too hard to learn from that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that seems to be a common thing, that people have a solid family unit growing in their life, and it's not always, not every time, but I enjoy hearing that when folks say they look up to I'm a new father. You'll hear Dr. Owens usually points it out, but and you being a father of four, and actually in our research here we saw your daughter sang the national anthem before one of your games.
Well, you know what, we had to trick her a little bit. It's really a cute little story. My kids had designed a little make-believe basketball game upstairs in one of our rooms. So they'd made signs up. It said on the door, it was the KFC Yum Center. I opened the door and they had their kitchen little kit out where they scanned the tickets they'd made for my wife and I. So they were going through the warm-ups and all this stuff. And then all of a sudden they're like, okay, the game's about to start. And my 5-year-old went over to the microphone and she goes, okay, now we're going to sing the national anthem. You have to stand. So my wife and I stood up, and the next thing I know, she's singing word by word. And she finished in like only a 5-year-old can do. I said, well, Lucy, how did you know those words? And she looked at me, she's like, well, duh, Dad, I go to all the games. Like only a 5-year-old can make you feel. As a 49-year-old, she made me feel about that call like that's the dumbest question I've ever heard. So it was really special.
Well, that sounds like fun. That sounds like your kids also look up to you, like you mentioned your father. So I think that's a good sign especially for a busy professional. So, Dr. Owens.
Yeah, so Coach Walz, you kind of mentioned that, you have brothers and sisters. You obviously have kids. You mentioned that. So my question is real simple, and maybe not so simple in your answer, but definitely a simple question. When did you know that you were a leader? When did you get that feeling? Was it, when you're 12 playing a sport, or was it, I've heard some of our guests say when they became a parent. So just kind of when did that kind of hit or ring true for you?
Well, that's really that's a great question and a tough one in its own, because it's as you're going through life, you're just wanting to be the best that you can be at whatever you're doing. And that doesn't, through grade school, playing different sports, in the classroom, and probably not until I actually got this job here at Louisville, when all of a sudden you're in charge. You're the head coach, and now the decisions all come onto you. As you both, I'm sure, know quite well, when I was an assistant for those 14 years, it was always easy to go into the head coach's office and say, hey, we've got a problem with this. And I learned real quick from the first coach that I worked for, Paul Sanderford. He taught me a valuable lesson early in my career. And he said, don't come in with the problem unless you have an idea for what the solution is going to be. Mm-hmm. And it really made me take a step back and think about that. And I never completely, truly got that until I got into this chair, to where now, the tough decisions that you have to make are all coming back on me. So I think that's when I first realized 14 years ago, 15 years ago now, what it truly meant when you're in charge and your decisions can impact so many people.
Okay. I like that. So, when you were coming up through the ranks as an assistant, was it, do you felt like those head coaches that you served under, you think they were grooming you for this? Did you ever see yourself as the head coach, or were you just kind of content, as I say, being the number 2 guy?
Well, I always wanted to be a head coach, and my journey and story is a little bit different in many ways. That I spent a few years at Western Kentucky with Paul Sanderford, and he got the head coaching job at Nebraska. Went with him, and I told him during that time my aspirations were to be a head coach. So he encouraged me after 4 years out at Nebraska that, hey, you need to work for somebody else. So I had an opportunity at Maryland, at Minnesota first, actually. Brenda Freeze hired me to be an assistant there. Then we went to Maryland. But all throughout this, I grew up with a speech impediment. I stutter. And I had several people tell me, hey, you're probably not cut out for a head coaching spot. There's too much media. There's too much getting in front of a camera. And it really became a point in my life where I just said, you know what, I'm going to try this.
Right.
And if you two want a good laugh, you can go on YouTube and pull up my press conference when I was hired here 14 years ago. And it was one of the worst press conferences I think anybody could have ever given in their life. And I wasn't sure afterwards if they still wanted me to be the head coach, because I was so nervous. I couldn't get anything out. I stuttered the entire time through. I think I sweat through my sport coat, my everything. And after that, I just realized, you know what? If people don't like the fact that I stutter, they don't have to listen to me.
Right.
And it's been a learning process, and it is for all. So there's a lot of ups and downs as you go through this. And there are times in your life where you've just got to go all in and say, if it works, if it works, if it doesn't, it doesn't.
No, I like that. I love that. The attitude is like I always tell, as a former coach, I used to tell my players, hey, nothing beats a failure but a try, right? You got to at least try, right? If you don't do it, we always know what the result's going to be. But if you try, who knows? You might hit a home run, you may strike out, but the most important thing is that you got up to bat.
Very true.
Dr. McCart.
Well, thank you, Coach Walz. And that's, people telling you that you'll probably never be a head coach. How wrong were they? And there's a saying we like that nobody ever built a statue to a critic. And yeah. I don't understand that, why people would tell somebody they could never do something, but that's maybe beyond the scope of this podcast. But you said a number of things here, and it goes into our next question. I'd like to ask you the question, and I'd like to guess at what one of those traits could be. So we're going to ask you, what are 3 traits you think up-and-coming leaders need to have? And I'm guessing from some of the research I've done, some of the things you've already said here, is you mentioned kind of weathering those up and downs, to be direct, look at the facts, even if it's uncomfortable. And there was a story we came across here preparing for the show that after your team lost in the tournament, you gathered them around and had kind of told everybody, hey, look down there at the winning team and how they're celebrating. That's where we want to go next year. And that's uncomfortable. I've played sports and I certainly lost, and you want to hang your head and go to the locker room, but to hold it there and to say, this is the reality of now, but it doesn't have to be the reality of the future. And let's use this moment to build upon. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that, and then some other traits you think leaders should have.
Yeah, I think what you just said is so true, and I think it's lost a lot, is the ability to live in reality. I think a lot of people look at things and think it's going to get better. It's just going to get better because it's going to get better. Instead of, we've got to make it better. We've got to be willing to be uncomfortable and actually find solutions. But for me, there's 3 traits that we talk about, and and I think traits change. I think things will change over time. And the first one to me is compassion. You have to have compassion. And then you have to have conviction. You've got to have a conviction for what you're doing. And it's kind of going to fight my conviction, but then you have to have the ability to adapt. So I like to be able to, the way we play, I like to press, I like to trap, I like to be aggressive. That's a conviction that I have. I love that. But at the same time, I've learned If it's not working, you better have the ability to adapt and change. So for me, those three are really what we are working on here in our program. And the first one, the compassion part, is really, really important. I am very fortunate and blessed to work with wonderful people, and we're different than I would say than a lot of working environments, because we can have the heart-to-heart conversations. And one of my favorite lines is, we have lost the ability to disagree and then still go have lunch in our country right now. But in our office, we can have heated debates on all politics, on race, on anything. And then we can all go eat lunch because you learn to respect each other. So that's why I think you've got to have that compassion. You've got to have conviction, but then you've got to have the ability to adapt, because change is hard. And especially when you have to admit you might be wrong. So those three for me are at the top of my list right now.
Well, that admitting we're wrong, that's tough. I know some people would rather lose everything, go bankrupt than admit they were wrong.
Yes, indeed.
But, Dr. Owens and I talk about this sometimes. If I find that I'm wrong about something, it's kind of a relief. Now I don't have to be wrong about that anymore. I'm able to look at it and see, and you're talking a little bit about differences of opinion, but that willingness to look and be adaptable and flexible, and there's maybe a better way out there. So, yeah, I think that's a great trait. And I want to say too, before I hand it back over to Dr. Owens, the idea of compassion, that's came up with President Bindapudi, with Daryl Griffith, Dr. Duncanstein, other leaders around the city who are just, business is tough and sports is even more competitive. And it's kind of hard, I think, to be out there and you got to get things done. And you don't normally think that goes hand in hand with compassion, but I'm so glad to hear leaders like yourself say that, and people at the forefront of our city and university here. Is there anything else you'd want to add about that?
I completely agree. It's lost in time. It really is. Compassion, it's something that can be learned. I mean, I really think it is, and I think when you start to show compassion to people, then they also learn what that is. And it's really in all walks of life, even in the profession that I have. My email is online, my phone number. So if you want to email me, you're more than welcome to, or call. And it's amazing what people will write and then hit send that they probably wouldn't say to you. But I reply to every email that I get. Now, my wife sometimes laughs at me and gets frustrated with me because, that's kind of when she goes to sleep, I'll get my phone out and start replying. And when you take 5 minutes to actually just send a reply back, and it doesn't have to be harsh or mean, all of a sudden that 5 minute that it took me to send it can really impact someone, because first off, they might not have sent the nicest email, because they might not have liked how we played the night before. But then when I take that time to send it back, all of a sudden the wall is down. Their frustration is down. And then we might have a 3 or 4 email exchange. And before I know it, they're going now to go tell their friends, they can't believe I emailed them back, and they're coming to the next game. Like it's not that hard. I've got a good friend that I've known for 20 something years. He is a Vietnam vet. And he told me, he goes, in his belief, he goes, life's real simple. There's good people and there's bad people. And it's not that hard to be a good person. A simple quote that I live with today.
Oh, that's a great point. And that when you write back, I imagine they feel like, oh, there's a person there. I was just shooting off my frustrations, but there's a real human on the other side of that email address that I'm dumping this negative emotion on. And you come back, and it's good for you to open up that window of humanity there. And imagine it'd be easy just to delete it, but or to take it down.
Well, it would be, you know what? But I do believe it's built our fan base, because our fans, I think what's unique about our women's basketball program is our fans truly feel like they're part of it. When we win, they win.
Right.
When we lose, they lose. They hurt. But because of the ability to have interaction, they feel a part of it, and I think that's really important.
Well, thank you, Dr. Owens.
Yeah, so I'm gonna segue a little bit away from leadership and go into learning, because you mentioned that compassion can be learned, and Steve Jobs made a quote where he says, "Learn continually. There's always one more thing to learn." And knowing that, as a head coach, mentor, professional, boss, CEO, all those titles, how important do you think it is for you to know what your learning style is as you are leading your teams?
I think it's really important. I think it's really important, obviously, for yourself, but more so, especially in what I'm doing in a 30-second timeout. I might get a minute and a half. I've got to really know what your learning styles are.
Gotcha.
Because not everybody can I call a timeout and draw it on a board, what I want to have done, and expect you to go out and execute it. That might not be how you learn. So it is really, really important not only to know your own, but as a leader to know what everyone else's learning style is. Because it took me a while to understand that. It took me a while to realize, hey, I used to try to fit that square peg in that round hole. And I'd keep banging and banging and banging and be like, it's just not going in. Mm-hmm. And then I realized, hey, you've got to be compassionate to understand that might not be how they learn.
Right.
So for us, I've got visual, I've got hearing, all of it, different types. So I think it's really important. You have to know not just your own, but others.
Got you. And how was that something you kind of picked up along the way? Is it something you learned what kind of like you said, you mentioned before, like when you got in that chair and everything, all decisions kind of laid in your lap, so to speak?
I learned that probably back when I was at the University of Maryland, and Brenda Freeze that I worked for allowed me to do a lot of in-game adjustments and draw some things up at timeouts. And I learned from Paul Sanderford, who was the head coach at Western Kentucky and Nebraska. He's one of the best basketball minds that I've worked for. And he taught me to and explained how to try to see things 2 or 3 plays ahead. Like we might run something in the first quarter because I just want to see how they're going to defend it. So if I have to run it again in the fourth quarter, I know the adjustment to make.
Right.
And not everybody can do that. So I learned at Maryland that if I'm going to want to be able to draw up plays on the fly at a timeout, something we haven't done before, that I need to do it at practice. I need to get my players adjusted and accustomed to being able to, we've never done this before, here's something that I think will work. And because we practiced it, then they were able to be successful with it when those situations occurred during a game.
Okay. That makes sense. Dr. McCart?
Sure. Well, Coach, we want to ask you about some useful tools that you use in your career, and hopefully you'll share them with us. But before I do that, I want to just talk about one thing in particular that I think in your profession is way different than ours. So that's feedback and evaluation. And Professor Owens and I, whenever we get we get an evaluation a couple months later, the students, if we don't know who they're from, the students have gone on. But when we talk about this with Coach Hawley, who's the head coach of Racing Louisville, the National Women's Soccer League team here in the city, but whenever you all have a bad day, you get booed by a stadium full of people sometimes, and it's just totally different. How do you, because I can see a bad evaluation and think about the whole way home, but you have to be able to move on to the next play. And how do you deal with that and just stay focused? I would imagine is part of it in the moment, but talk a little bit about that and maybe other tools that could help leaders.
Well, you might be surprised because I'm sure we have a lot of the same styles of how we do that. Like, you can finish up a class and you can probably leave that night going, you know what? I didn't do a great job. That was not my best night of delivering my message. And we can finish up a game and I can look at my staff and be like, guys, I didn't do a good job. I did not have these young women prepared for what took place. And then there are times where, I'll sit at a timeout and we will have tried to do something and it was completely wrong. And like I said, I think laughter is very important. I think it's important to be able to laugh at yourself. Mm-hmm. And I can tell our kids, hey, we're going to do this again because we did it so bad the first time. There's no way the opponent knows what we were trying to do. And then it gives a little laughter to it. So I do a lot of self-critiquing after games. I'll go home, and especially if it's a TV game, my wife will DVR the game for me because I'm one that I just can't go home and go straight to sleep. So I'll rewatch the game, and I'll have my notepad. And ever since they came out with this DVR, that's the best thing ever when I can rewind and fast forward. So I will do my own self-evaluation. So normally before you even send me that email telling me what I didn't do right, what we did wrong, I can pretty much agree with you on areas. But it's part of having a thick skin, especially when you're in a profession where you are in the public eye every moment. And it's what I've talked to my players about, because we are in a different generation and live in a different time where, when you do well, social media is a wonderful thing.
Right.
Because everybody's telling you how great you are. And then when you don't do so well and you're a 17 to 23, 24-year-old and they're telling you how bad you are on social media, I tell our kids, do not get on social media tonight. You're not going to like it.
Right.
But it's how you handle it and how you adjust to it.
Well, I think that's a great point, and interesting to hear you say that, because we can, as you said your age earlier, and Dr. Owens and I, for anyone who's just listening, is not watching, we're middle-aged also. So it's we can deal with those things a little better. Whereas 18 to 22-year-olds, I know that's a little harder sometimes to hear that criticism on social media. Maybe they don't have the same experiences. I'm glad you're there to guide them through that. Well, that laughter is important. I'm taking all kinds of notes here. I better hand it over to Dr. Owens for our next question.
Hey, no problem. Sticking with the learning component, and you mentioned that we're in a different generation. I'll just queue up my my next question here. And I just want to know, just from your opinion, I mean, we kind of joked a little bit about it a little earlier that you've kind of seen Louisville kind of transition through 3 different conferences. But aside from that, in your opinion, how do you think COVID has affected, the sports industry, women's basketball? I mean, you're kind of in the epicenter of it all. Being on a college program, you get to kind of see how it affects the football team and the men's basketball team and the lacrosse team and all the other teams at Louisville. So how do you think that COVID has kind of either made it better or kind of something that we need to look out for moving forward?
The one thing I will say, I think COVID is as bad as it's been. I think the one thing it has allowed us to do here, and it's probably not just us, a lot of people, is we have learned to maximize our time much more efficient because of your time restrictions of how long you could be together in the same room, in the same location. We have really learned to make the most of every second. Zooms, webcasts, whatever, all of it. We do a lot of things now where we'll get on and do a Zoom as a team instead of having everybody have to come over to the office. It's simple. And it's things that I never used to do. Actually, I never knew how to do it. And now we have learned, hey, we can maximize our time and give them more time to themselves by just being more efficient. So we still now, because all of we have no players here on campus right now. Everybody's still at home. And it used to be where you might talk to them once a week or twice a week and check in. Well, now we can do a Zoom call once a week and see everybody's face.
Right.
Because that's one thing I have learned is at least now I know when I'm talking to them, they're paying attention to me. Where when you get them on the phone, you don't know what somebody else is doing. So it's been very efficient, and that's one thing that we have been able to actually use as a benefit to us over this COVID time. But it was a challenge, no question.
No, that's good. I think that one thing I always try to ask people, not so much on this podcast, but just in other conversations in different settings, what is the good that has come from COVID? I mean, I know a lot of time the media or whatever, we spin it in such a negative way, but I'm always interested to know, what good came from it. And I think that the fact that you are able to maximize your time and, like I said, become more efficient and gain some, as we were talking about in the last question, gain some interesting feedback. Like you said, you kind of know you're getting their eyes on the screen and in their locations, and you kind of can see, how they're doing. I think that's phenomenal. Dr. McCart.
Well, yeah, and I imagine that seeing their face, you can check in kind of on their mental well-being as well, which you mentioned. And it's interesting, the things that people say that get picked up by the media. And one article that just came up a lot of times, one topic was that you're concerned over the mental health side of things whenever your team couldn't walk when they got shifted to a new hotel in Texas. And so we talk about employee well-being. I teach in a healthcare leadership program. And so mental health in the workplace is really important to us. I don't know if you would mind saying a little bit about those things, because along with the COVID question, that a lot of people's support structures were kind of taken away from them, whether that was walking, getting fresh air, as you talked about with your team, or just seeing friends and seeing people that kind of helped us get through things together. And since that article was so prevalent out there, would you mind to talk about that moment in time and looking out for the mental health of your team during that time and at other times? Yeah,
in going back to our bubble that we're in San Antonio, the NCAA did is they tried to make it as efficient and as good of an experience as they could. But for us at that point in time, we were very fortunate in many ways. At the first week and a half, I think that we were there. We were in a hotel that every room had a balcony and was really nice. So you could get fresh air. You could open your door. And as crazy as it might sound, I could hear the cars go by. Just a little bit of every day. And then when we advanced to the Sweet 16, they moved all 16 teams into a Marriott. Beautiful property, really nice. Not one window open to the outside. There wasn't a balcony. And you were basically secluded to your room. And the first day and a half we weren't able to get outside and walk unless we were going to go get our COVID test. Right. And it was just, for myself, the previous week and a half, I'd wake up at, because the time change anyway, I'd be up at 6:15 and I'd go out and get my 2-3 miles in, just walking up a path. It was just one path we could go up and down, but you were outside getting fresh air. And they were trying to make the adjustment and didn't quite do it fast enough. And it was a concern for me because our players were doing the same thing. It's amazing what fresh air, a little sunlight can do for someone's morale. Especially, right. I think I calculated, I think we had been COVID tested by the time we finished our last game. I think it was like 25 straight days to where you're going to go get a COVID test done, which, believe me, we're grateful for the opportunity to be able to play. But we're trying to find ways to help them just do something different, because it was a challenge. And, I can say, and I'm sure I'm not the only one out there, but, my parents did not see their grandkids for about a year. We would drive up and we'd stay out in the driveway. My parents would be inside the garage, and that's as close as we would get because of COVID, because you're just concerned about their health and at their age. So it was a definite toll on a lot of people's mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure the NCAA conference committee was doing all that they could to help things in unprecedented times. But I just appreciate that you brought up the mental health aspect for your players. So, well, shifting to a different question here, and we had the opportunity to have Vince Tyra here on the podcast as well. And he had a lot of great things to say about developing athletes so that they could be productive individuals, members of society, because they're just here for a short amount of time and then go on, and the airplanes and the hotels and the all the support structure is not there. And so that's really kind of what I'm getting at with this next question. What are some things that you hope your players go out and take with them as they head out into life after the university?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a great question. I appreciate that, because that's one thing. We are very fortunate here in women's basketball, and this is the reason that I've always decided to stay in coaching women's basketball, is because we get the opportunity to coach these young women for 4 years. So you watch them come in as a 17, 18-year-old freshman, and they leave as a 22, 23-year-old woman. And the amount of change that takes place in those 4 or 5 years, it's really it's something to behold and to see. And we try to prepare them for life after college, not time management. We don't have a bunch of rules here. That's one of the things that I talk to all my recruits about. We don't have 2 pages of what you can do and what you can't do. I tell their parents, here at the University of Louisville, you act like an adult, we'll treat you like one. And if you don't know how, we'll help teach you. Because I personally believe, I don't know about you two, but if you guys showed up for your classes late 4 or 5 times, I don't think, Dr. Bendapudi is going to take you out in the parking lot and make you run lines. You just lose your job. And that's one of the things that I tell our girls. This is a time in your life where you've got to make decisions on your own. And you always make the right decision, no. But if I'm telling you, you have to be in it this time, you can't go here, you can't go there, this needs to be your friend, well, then you're never learning. And to me, that's what your college years are about, is learning to make decisions on your own. And you're not always going to make the best one. Now you two may have always made the right one. Now, I kind of didn't always make that right one. So you learn to live with it. And I've had players up in my office, after a decision's been made and it wasn't a good one, and it's just like, hey, now we've got to learn from that. It can't happen a second time. And I've been very, very fortunate that we have not had players that make that same decision twice, because they feel like we're giving them that power of acting like an adult, making the responsible decision on a tough situation. So that's kind of how we help prepare them for life. We do a lot of financial seminars with our student athletes, because I think that's one of the areas that can be lost at times. What a credit card is. When you decide to finally go get that card, when it's that minimum payment, to stay away from that, pay the whole thing.
Right.
Little things in that area. So when they do leave here, it's refreshing when we get the phone call back that's like, hey, thank you for providing those resources for us, because now I feel like I'm prepared.
Right.
I'm glad. That's refreshing to hear about the financial seminars, because I always say, if you don't learn about personal finance, Citibank or Wells Fargo will be happy to teach you. They'd be glad to teach you how to handle your money their way. But that's great, Coach Walz. And it's I also tell students that I got a bachelor's and a master's in business and didn't learn about personal finance. It was all there's more of a corporate perspective on all those things, and that is just something that it's a tough world out there if you don't know those skills. So yeah, thank you. Dr. Owens, please.
Oh, sure. No problem. We're going to jump around here a little bit, Coach Walz, so get into more of the athletics and the women's basketball questions. One question I'm interested to know about is, I'll put it right here. Who was or is your favorite or most memorable coach, and why, right? And then what did you learn from them?
You know, I would say the one that probably had the biggest impact on my career is Paul Sanderford, who I've mentioned. Coach is still a good friend of mine. And it's one of the things that he's talked to me about in the past when I first started. You know, everybody talks about who your mentors are. Mm-hmm. And, you know, the one thing I learned that Paul always would tell me, hey, it's great to have a mentor, but what you need to have is an advocate. Mm. You want somebody not just to say, this job's great, you should go after this. You want that person that's going to tell you that and also pick up a phone for you. Who's going to pick that phone up and try to sell you to somebody. And then Paul really, he taught me from watching him for 6 years that you can be demanding. You can demand the best out of your student athletes as long as they know you care about them. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that we take a lot of pride in around here. I tell parents all the time, if they trust me with their daughter, I'm going to treat their daughter like I treat mine. Mm-hmm. I've got 3 children, 3 daughters. I'm going to treat them exactly like I treat mine. Now, I finished that sentence with, my kids don't like me all the time, because sometimes you've got to tell them they can't do something.
Right.
You know, and that's our jobs. But they always know that I love them. Mm-hmm. So that's one of the things Paul taught me that early on, that if your players and your people that work for you, if they truly know you care about them, you can push them to be the best and make them uncomfortable at times. And at those moments, they might not be happy, but when they take a step back after it's finished, they're probably going to then be able to realize you were just trying to help them be the best. So Paul Sanderford is the person and the coach that I still look up to and I still talk to a lot today.
Got you. That's great. I mean, because like you said, I love the fact that you said don't just have a mentor, find an advocate. That's good advice. So for all those out there taking notes, I think that's a good thing. Somebody that can actually be a reference. I guess that's for a working class adult, somebody that you can put down on your reference sheet and that will speak well of you so that you can land that job or get the promotion or whatever it is your company is looking for. Dr. McCart, what do you got?
Yes, and Coach, I wanted to ask you this question. We're probably getting close to our time here, but you mentioned and I found a number of places online where the issue of disparities between men and women's athletics at the university level is something that you'd like to see change. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that and maybe some other goals that you want to see that are maybe a little closer to home or on the more macro scale in terms of those disparities, or any goals that you have in the next 3 to 5 years you'd love to tell us about.
Sure. No, you know what? I've been very fortunate and blessed in all of our athletes here at the University of Louisville, from when I was first hired with Tom Jurich and now to Vince, that they take a lot of pride in treating all of our student athletes well. You know, I'm not one of the coaches that are upset on their own campus that, you know, the men get this, the women only get this. I've always said it. I don't expect the same. To me, it's not about the same, because, you know, if you wear a size 15 shoe, I don't need a size 15 shoe. I just need a size 12. You know, so I just want to be treated fair. Mm-hmm. And I want our young women to have those same opportunities to be able to be successful. And that's one of the things that took place in our women's tournament this past year, is we didn't need, and the weight room was the talking point of kind of what got things going. We don't need all the same weights that may have been available at the men's tournament. But what they did provide was nowhere close to being sufficient. And that's where the troubles and the frustrations came in. And then it started to open up a little bit of Pandora's box, because then all of a sudden other issues started to arise. And I don't think I'm just speaking for myself when we say we just want the same opportunities for these women as were available for the men, not expecting the same thing. And I think when we can get to that, then you're going to be able to really start to see our game in women's basketball grow even more. Because I do believe, and I say this all the time, if I can get you to come to our game one time, you will come back because you will like the product. But it's just getting people to come one time is what's important. And then if you don't mind, I would like to share a little quick story with you guys on leadership about I was very fortunate when I coached at the University of Maryland to have a young lady whose father was really big into companies would bring him in that were struggling, and Fortune 500 companies and very successful companies to help try to turn the company around. And he gave me a life lesson, a story that when he would go into these companies, he would always say, I have to have full control. If you want my service, I have full control to turn this around, because the only reason he was hired was because they were failing. And he would meet with every single person in that company. He would have a big meeting, and he'd also meet individually at times and would explain, do you have suggestions? Because he was a big believer in the people that are working for you are the ones that see the day in and day out. What changes could be made to improve something? And he would say, I want to know what your thoughts are. What can we do to better our company? And he said, but now I don't have time now, but I'm here from 6 a.m. to 8, and then also from 9 until midnight. Any of those times would work. Please schedule an appointment. And he would always be amazed at how few people would come because it wasn't convenient. And he told me, he goes, the ones that came were the ones that I kept. And those were the ones that he went to war with, as he would say, in trying to help save that company. And I've learned that ever since then, which would have been back in 2005 when I first met him, time is one of the most valuable assets to everybody. And when you're able to give of your time and show somebody, hey, I care so much about this company being successful or this classroom being successful that you're willing to come on your own time, he's like, that's when I know I've got somebody who's bought in to what we're trying to do. And I learned a lot about that. He told me he does that every time he would go into a company, because he would want to know who truly is invested in the company and not just 8 to 5.
Gotcha.
So I thought that was a valuable lesson that I learned on how he attacked his leadership model.
No, I like that. I think maybe that's when we should have office hours, Dr. Owens, late at night over at BW3s during basketball season. And yeah, I think that'd be fine. But no, Coach Walz, I like that story, and that especially the investment of time there, because it shows commitment. I mean, really, are you committed, or just when it's easy? So yeah, I think that's a great story. So, well, Dr. Owens, I know you're known around here as the fun one with the fun questions at the end. So I'll turn it over to you. Yeah,
I do have one question before we get into our rapid fire question. And that would simply be this. Coach Walz, in a sport such as women's basketball, if you could just take a few minutes, a couple seconds, however long it needs to take, to explain why relationships are so important.
Well, that's simple. Relationships, you have to have that bond in our profession, in lots of profession. It's not just in women's basketball. That the trust, the caring, because we're asking our players to go out there and believe in what we're telling them. When we put a game plan together, we've watched hours of film, and you're trusting them and asking them to trust us. If you do this, we're going to be successful. Well, the only way that can get done is if they know that you have that relationship with them. They have to also know if they would ask me for something, they've got to know that I'm there for them. So building relationships is what it's all about in the profession that I have. And we take great pride in that. That's why, when our players are at home, we FaceTime with them. We pick up the phone and have those conversations just to check in. It doesn't have to be an hour-long phone call. Just, right. Hey, I just want to see how you're doing, how things are. 5 minutes. They know that you care about them and you're thinking about them.
Sweet. I love it. And that's also goes out to, all of our listeners out there. I don't think we're violating NCAA rules. This is what you get when you come to UofL, right? This is what you get. This is what you're going to get from Coach Walz. And it ties into, why the success does follow Coach Walz. He's got the golden touch. He's got the Midas touch, as some might say. And so saying all that, before we let you get out of here, Coach Walz, we do this with all of our guests. We have a little fun with our guests. The first portion of fun we have is what we call rapid fire. Rapid fire is a really simple, really fun game we like to play. I'm going to list off 5 questions. Just give us the first answer that comes to your mind. And I think we'll have a lot of fun with this. And I think our audience, they love listening to this as well. So here we go. Rapid fire, round 1, first question. Here we go. If you could pick one word to describe your life so far, what would it be and why?
Journey. It's been a journey. Having the opportunity. Why? Because I grew up in Northern Kentucky, thought I would teach high school. That's my undergrad. I wanted to be a secondary education teacher. Thought I'd live in that area for the rest of my life. And then before I know it, I've been in Western Kentucky, Nebraska, Minnesota. I've had the opportunity to coach USA basketball. I've been to Thailand. I've been to Russia. Never dreamed a basketball could take me all over the world. So journey is it.
Sweet. Love it. You successfully got through round 1. Round 2. Now, I think you may have already answered this question, but we'll find out real shortly. What are 3 non-negotiable characteristics that anyone on your team or tribe has to have?
Work ethic, accountability, and honesty. Honesty is my big one. I'm going to tell you, I always tell my players I can deal with the truth. We can figure out something if you tell me the truth.
I'm with it. You successfully passed round 2. Let's move on to round 3. This is like the greatest question, I think, on rapid fire, but this is my opinion. Coach Walz, what is your favorite dessert?
Ice cream.
Is there a flavor?
No, any type. It does not matter.
Great answer. Moving forward. If you weren't coaching women's basketball, what would you be doing as a career?
Teacher, school teacher.
And then last question, as people who are in the teaching profession, we definitely applaud that. You definitely will move on to round 5. Last question. If you could sit with your 13-year-old self, what would you tell him?
Well, that's really a good one. I would sit there and tell him, don't let anyone tell you you can't do something. And be comfortable with yourself.
Got you.
And I can't tell you, guys, a number of times in school that, the old days that you sit in your rows and you would read a paragraph and it would go down. The next person would read a paragraph. I'd sit there and be terrified for 20 minutes before it got to me, just worried about if I was going to be able to get it out.
Right. Okay. We can respect that. I like that. I love that. I love that. It's a great answer. That's a great answer. So my last fun question that I would want to ask you, I don't think I'm going to deviate. All right. I've asked this to 16 straight guests. It's kind of been a stumper for all 16. So I think I'm going to keep the tradition rolling. If your life was the title of a book, made up or real, what would it be and why?
Wow. No, that's, oh my, a title of a book. Oh my gosh. I don't know that one. I'm not going to lie to you. That's the ups and downs of Jeff Walz. That's, you're on a high when things are going well, you're winning, then you're on a low when they're not going well. Recruiting's going great, then it's not going great. So I'd say the ups and downs of Jeff Walz.
I love it. I read a book every 10 days in 2021. And trust me, if I saw the ups and downs of Jeff Walz and knew the record and the story and the history, I definitely pick it up. It's definitely a page turner. Got to figure out how these ups are happening and how these downs are going down. Last thing before we get you out of here, before you can go and finish checking on your players and doing recruiting and all those other fun things that coaches have to do in the offseason as they prepare for what's coming up next. Final thought, what is your wise counsel or idea or thought or goal you want to share that you would shout from the mountaintops for the rest of 2021?
Oh, well, enjoy life. After what we all just went through with COVID, enjoy the moment.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you plan too far ahead, and before you know it, you can't do it. So live in the moment, but plan for the future.
I love it. Live for the moment, plan in the future. That's exactly what we have to do each and every day. Coach Walz, it's been an amazing hour that we've spent with you, picking your brain, learning about your leadership style, learning about how learning is happening, and obviously understanding a little bit of how the women's basketball program works at the University of Louisville. Can't thank you enough for the time you shared with us today. Dr. McCarty, anything before we let Coach Walz get out of here?
No, I think that was great. And I think from all the way from compassion to navigating the ups and downs to addressing disparities in mental health, I think we've been spending the last hour with a real Renaissance man, a Renaissance person. I'd like to see where those people are now that said you never make it as a head coach, because we are so glad to have you here at the University of Louisville.
Thank you so much. This was an absolute pleasure.
Well, thank you, Coach Walz, and go enjoy the rest of your day, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you, guys.
No problem. All right, Dr. McCart, what do you think? Coach Walz was an amazing guest. He gave us some great insight and some great tips. What do you think?
Well, what a down-to-earth person, too. With I wasn't kidding. His resume of being one of the most successful coaches in Division I women's basketball, it is really just a treat to talk to someone like that and to learn that there's common themes amongst all these world-class leaders that we talk to of just being a hard worker, being willing to look at how the game went, to go home and watch the game again and take notes and get it out there, and just his willingness to stay after it. And there's something I could pick up here to help be a better professor, better leader, and even a better dad. I think there were some tidbits in there. So thank you.
Oh, no doubt. I think if I were to take one thing away, it's something that you mentioned way early on in this conversation, and something that we've heard from many of our guests that we've had on here. Compassion keeps coming up. It's a theme that is coming up in all of these leaders. Not every single one of them, but I think even in the ones that haven't mentioned compassion, there's been a compassionate motivator to why they do what they do and to their success of how they've climbed the ranks, whether it be to a CEO or a head coach or an athletic director or even the president of a university. I think compassion is just one of those things that more and more leaders are understanding. I think it could be a sign of the time, and you let me know, Dr. McCart. I mean, I think we were raised on paper, I guess you would say, the tail end of, this rough, tough leader, right? Leaders are supposed to be distant from the people. Leaders kind of have to bark orders. They kind of have to be demanding, and in some cases demeaning. And I think that there has been a huge culture shift in my lifetime. I don't know when it happened. I don't know how it happened. But I don't think you would hear leaders from the 70s and 80s, really talking a lot about compassion. But here we are in 2021, and we've had 16, 17, however many guests we've had, and they've all had a component of compassion laced through their leadership style.
I heard a leadership theorist one time saying that after World War II, so many of the soldiers that came home after World War II went into leadership and were leading companies, and there was a big boom in our economy. And the way that they knew how to lead was the way their basic training, and you were in the military, you could relate to that, but that was part of the top-down authoritarian type of leadership that really great for developing soldiers in a lot of cases, but may not always. Was basic training very compassionate? I don't know. You'll have to let us know that. But that was what one leadership theorist said, and so I wonder if that's part of it. Whenever there's people evolve, societies evolve, and have try different things and work to be more inclusive. So that could be part of it, according to leadership theorists and literature out there. But I think that from a teaching perspective, I know that if I work with people, I feel like I get more out of them. They're willing to open up and share more of themselves than some of the classes I had, where they would stand up and say, here's the curve. A third of you aren't going to be here at midterms because you're going to fail out and we won't see you again. Maybe you should try another major. That didn't help me feel open and learning. So I don't know, Dr. Owens, I don't know if that's a good answer or if it sounds like I'm stalling, but there's I like the compassion, and I work better under a spirit of understanding than without one. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I think for all of our listeners, for all of our students out there, if you're not compassionate, Coach Walz said it best. You can learn it. Go find a book, go to a seminar, reach out to myself or Dr. McCart or anyone in the UofL faculty program. You can learn this. It is not a skill that you don't have to be without. It is not. I know in psychology, we're always talking nature versus nurture. This is definitely something that can be nurtured into you. Anybody can learn to be compassionate and just understand what's going on. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as we approach our time for today, I want to thank you for joining us today. Don't forget, you can check us out. You can check out this podcast as well as any of our other pods at UofL.me/leadership-pod. Again, that's UofL.me/leadership-pod. As we start embracing the fall as it comes, and we know that we're going to open up the campus and people will be hustling and bustling, the campus will be as busy as ever. We notice that the CDC is changing its guidelines. So we hope to see you and any of your friends in one of our classrooms, whether it be virtually or on campus, to get a degree that gets you ahead. Remember, we have online bachelor's, master's, and certificate leadership programs in a wide range of industries, covering a wide range of industries from healthcare to education to human resources. You can check those out at UofL.me/podcast-OLL. Again, that's UofL.me/podcast-OLL. Any parting words, Dr. McCart?
Well, I think that being willing to face reality and then build on it. I think that's one thing that I haven't mentioned yet that I learned from Coach today. And but even if it's uncomfortable, be willing to see where you're at right now and learn and build from it. And the last thing is that he writes back to the naysayers. How about that? Yeah. How often do you hear that? Someone sends him an email. He sits down after he could be going to bed and writes him to let him know that he's there. He's a person. He cares, and he'd like him to be part of the fan base. I mean, what a great treat to sit down with Coach Walz. So that's it. And also, Dr. Owens, I'm going to say this often, but what a treat to sit down with you for another hour this week. Learn from you.
It's been great. It's been great. It's always been great. I tell behind the scenes, everyone who doesn't know, I'm telling you, Dr. McCart has a special Google that he can get all the research on any person that we can figure out. My Google, I must have a bad algorithm or something, but his Google, he does a phenomenal job researching all the information, getting information on our guests. I appreciate it. It's great. He's always doing something I'm like, where did you find that? He's like, it's right here on the internet. I'm like, well, my internet didn't find it. So Dr. McCart has been great as always. But ladies and gentlemen, as we say around here, you can count the number of seeds in an apple, but you can't count the number of apples in a seed. When you teach, you never know how many lives you will influence. So Cardinal Nation, keep leading, keep learning, and most importantly, keep influencing. We hope to see you soon. But until then, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment anywhere you see us, whether it be on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or Anchor, so that you can be aware of all the information connected to the UofL program, as well as to the Cardinal Call podcast and any new thing that we have coming out. So until then, don't forget to take care and stay safe.